don't know exactly where to start with this story, so I'm going to begin in the middle. The middle being spring of 1998. My mother was 101 years old. She was residing in a nursing home, and my sister had moved into the old home place. She received a phone call from a young man in New Jersey. Now, that was a period when you're liable to get a phone call. They want to sell you a cemetery plot, or they're trying to sell you insurance. Who knows what they were. They want to sell you a credit card. Well, that's kind of what she expected when she answered the phone, and the young man identified himself and said he was a historian who investigated military accidents. And in this case, he had been asked to go back to 1943. A plane crash at Ellsworth, well, it's Ellsworth now, but I don't remember. I think it was Ellis Air Force Base in 1943. A family had asked him if he could search for the military records of this plane crash. It took place at Ellis Air Force Base in Rapid City, South Dakota. So he told my sister he was looking for family of Howard Estep. And he told her that this was the phone number and address he had been given of Howard's mother. And she said, well, I was his sister. And my mother is in the nursing home. And he was shocked when she said that. You mean Howard's mother is still living? She said, yes, she's still living. She's 101. Well, it kind of threw him off base. He said, well, this is what I'm looking for. The family. I'm trying to find out what information they have from an airplane crash that took place in Rapid City, South Dakota. Well, my sister said, well, I don't have much information, but my sister's been working on our family history, and if there was anything to be known, she would have that information. So, okay, a few weeks passed, she gets another phone call. This time it's from a man in Nashville, Tennessee. He's the one that initiated this investigation because his father was one of the members there were 10 soldiers on the plane that crashed on June 17th, 1943. Exactly. It has been 80 years ago now. So he had proceeded with this investigation. He wanted the information as to why the plane crashed, who was on that plane, who survived. We knew nothing. No information had ever been given to my parents telling them why the plane crashed and exactly where it crashed. because the air base was right there at the Badlands in South Dakota. And everybody's heard of the Badlands. All right. The young man in Nashville said he was planning a trip to South Dakota. He and his wife, his brother and his wife, his sister and his mother living in California would be meeting them there. Well, I picked up on that and I said, oh, there's no way they're going without me. We've never known what happened to my brother. I want to go. And so we made plans. I met this family in Nashville. We got on a plane. We landed in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and the young researcher was with us. We rented a van, and we drove across the state of South Dakota to Ellis Air Force Base. Now, they knew we were coming. Plans had been made. There was going to be a big air show that weekend, and we were going to be part of it. Air show was one that they called it Dakota Thunder. It drew up to 50,000 people on the day of the air show, and that's the day we were going to be there. All right, we arrive in South Dakota, and we've been welcomed by the VIPs at the air base. We had checked into a hotel, so we were ready for what was to come. Now, it's a little difficult for me to know where to start, where to finish, or what order to put this story in. As I recall, we got the information from the air base. They had lots of paperwork that had been found, and we got reports. We knew the names of all of the airmen that were on that airplane. 6 of 10 soldiers were killed in that plane crash. It was a B-17F bomber, the plane that my brother had said was the safest plane in the world. Okay, we got to go to a breakfast, VIP breakfast, the 8 of us. Sam, his sister, his brother, their wives, his sister Peggy, and his mother, and of course the historian and me. We were there for the VIP breakfast. We were recognized, and information was given to the entire group that was there. And when that was finished, we went out to the airfield. That's where the planes were lining up, getting ready for the air show. There was also planned a luncheon for us. They had prepared a large lounge, food everywhere. We were being treated like VIPs. For the air show, we would sit on the front row, and they said that these air shows usually drew up to 50,000 people, and we're on the front row to see the show. Now, the funny thing was, while I was sitting there waiting, watching as the planes came out, a lady came up to me and punched me on the shoulder, and she said, "Are you the lady who is sister of the soldier named Estep?" And I said, "Yes." Now, she had picked me out of all those people. She said, "My family name is Estep, and we're from Southeast Tennessee." I said, "No question about it. We're related." Well, we got to talk about that. But, let's see, I wanted to go back. I forgot exactly where I was going with this. I'm trying to think where to pick up. Okay. The day before the air show, there were 2 or 3 of the military staff that took us out to the airfield to show us exactly where the plane had crashed. The old runway was no longer being used. The grass was growing up between the cracks of the pavement. But it's a strange feeling you get when you're in a place like that. And you know that's where your brother was killed. And I looked up, and a B-1 plane was flying right over my head. I saw where the plane had impacted the bank. Now, this is what happened. I may have to refer to some notes here that I had written, and I'll read off what was said about the plane. Okay. One of the airmen was still living in Florida. He had reported what he remembered from that plane crash. Now, he was in a hospital for 3 years from the burns on his arms and his back. And at one point, he died, but with CPR, they brought him back to life. Now, this is what he said. He said the B-17 was 8th in line in a formation of 10 planes leaving the airbase at Rapid City. As the plane extended the east-west runway, the pilot thought it seemed sluggish, and when he pulled back on the controls, he did not get the normal feel. Although he was inexperienced in flying a B-17, modifications had been made to the plane that they were unfamiliar to him. Also, just before takeoff, a heavy, flammable fuel tank had been mounted in the bomb bay, and 20,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition were loaded in the area occupied by 6 of the 10 men. The pilot hadn't been made aware of the extra load in the tail of the plane. He didn't apply the superchargers. When he realized the plane could not make the lift, just before reaching the end of the runway, he decided to abort the flight. Seeing a field of grass ahead, he applied the brakes, expecting the plane to continue across the field and come to a stop. This would have been just an incident had it not been for a pond that lay 330 yards beyond the end of the runway, which could not be seen by the pilot. The plane sailed over the pond to impact the bank on the other side. The navigator was thrown through the window in the nose of the plane. The aerial engineer spoke to the co-pilot, telling him to get out, but he only stared back at him. The engineer turned to open the door to the bomb bay, and as he did, an explosion came from the area. He quickly closed the door to keep the flames from entering the cockpit and yelled again to the co-pilot to get out. He then told the pilot to exit through the cockpit window, and he in turn crawled out behind the pilot. The metal was too hot to touch. He used his wrist to pull himself out of the window, then fell to the ground and rolled in the grass to extinguish the flames on his back. Now, one of the men in the back had crawled through some sort of window, and he was sitting on the grass. He had 80% burns. He died a few hours later. Okay, we've got the paper report listing all of the men on that plane, what happened to them. And in the report of their investigation, they found the bodies, or the men, of 9. Number 10 was missing. Couldn't find anything on the 10th man. The 10th man was my brother. He was in the very tail end of the plane where the majority of the ammunition was that exploded. They couldn't find any sign of him, and they considered him AWOL. I swallowed hard when I read that in the report. He had been blown to bits. My family never knew that. They were never told anything. An empty coffin was sent back home. My mother thought a body was inside that coffin. There was nothing. She never knew that. No one ever told her. In fact, my mother died 3 weeks before my flight to Rapid City, South Dakota. Now, the thing I wanted to tell you about, the reason I'm telling you this story, is while we were there, the historian, he had brought his metal detector with him, had big garbage bags with him. So after they had taken us out and shown us where the plane had landed and different aspects, and in the photographs you could see a little white house on a farm that adjoined the airfield. That little white house was still there. It had been 55 years, and there sat that little white house. Well, who knows? Maybe the same family still lived in that house. Wouldn't hurt to go see. We cut across the farmland in that van, ended up in the driveway of the little white house, but nobody was home. Okay, what do we do next? Well, the 3 men in the group, they started walking across. It wasn't very far from where we were standing to the fence line of the farm, between the farm and the airfield. They went over and started digging with their hands because they didn't bring any tools. but they were using the metal detector. Well, they came back with a garbage bag, a lot of material in that garbage bag. And I'm going to show you two things that were found at that spot. Here is a piece of metal from the plane, the B-17 bomber, that my brother was flying in, found 55 years later on top of the ground. That part of the farm had never been farmed or used for anything. It was left as it was. Okay, 55 years later, a B-17 bomber, piece of metal. Here is a little piece, as you can see this. This is melted metal, just one little scrap. Now, the historian gave me these things because he knew I would like to have something to take home. I wanted to take something back to my family because this was the only thing left that would represent my brother. He was 21 years old. He had dropped out of school when he was a freshman in high school. Mama didn't even know he wasn't going to school. He was working at a little restaurant in the south end of town, and he would come home every day, the same hour as the rest of the kids in the family, after school. She had no idea he was not in school anymore, 16 years old. I can read you the things he wrote in his letters. First, let me show you his picture. I want you to know who I'm talking about. I hope you can see it well enough. This was my brother in uniform. Take a good look. Age 21. Above him, this is the smoke you see from the burning plane. Now, he would describe the things he did. And this is not to brag, but you have to consider he dropped out of school as a freshman in high school, but he's now in the Army Air Corps. And he writes to Mama and says, well, for the last 5 days, I've made E's. E's is the highest score you can make. I have 3 more than anyone in my class. Here's one thing I know you'll be glad to hear. I won't get to fly in combat when I go over. The Army seemed to think we're too valuable to risk. That's an honor in a way. For the lack of someone with my experience, 120 planes sat on the ground during an all-out raid in Africa. It was a simple defect, but the planes couldn't fly with the voltage regulators burning out the generators. There's such a shortage of men over there that not one over there could set them. I could have fixed them all in 2 days. Another report, he says, see if I'm getting this one right. I've been in school 3 days now, and I like it fine. it the best it possibly could be. The instructors are the best men Boeing has, and they really try to teach us something. We learned quite a lot, too. Oh, that wasn't what I wanted. He described the plane. He did say in one of his letters he wanted Daddy to know that in order to pilot the plane that he was the crew chief for. Now, crew chief meant when that plane came off the assembly line, it was assigned to him. He went everywhere that one plane went. He was on that plane everywhere it went. He was responsible for keeping records and track of the plane. So, he tells about technical order, which has over 400 pages, and it tells every little detail about the plane. He also said he had to be able to take that plane apart piece by piece and put it back together before he could pilot the B-17 bomber. This was a high school dropout that was given this responsibility. That's something to be proud of. Okay, now where do I want to go from there? Oh, I had one more piece I wanted to show you. Take a close look at this. Do you know what that is? See on the end of this? It's got the date, 1942. This was one of the bullets of those 20,000 rounds of ammunition. This is one of those bullets that was exploding from the plane. Now, the man that lived in the little white house, his nephew had come that day to have lunch with him. He had just joined the Navy, and he wanted to come and tell his uncle that he would be leaving that day. And they're having lunch. And all of a sudden, the house began to shake. Everything in the house was shaking. And they didn't know what was happening. The plane had crashed so many yards from the house. They ran out, started running across the field toward the plane. The uncle hit the ground and told the nephew, "Down, get down." Those bullets were exploding like popcorn everywhere. My brother was in the back of the plane where all of that ammunition had been stored. We didn't know any of these facts. We didn't know where the plane crashed. Nothing. And I learned these things 3 weeks after my mother died. Okay, June 17th. That's the day I remember. You've got Memorial Day. You've got the 4th of July. You've got Veterans Day. But the day I remember is June 17th, 12 o'clock noon. Now, There's a lot more detail in this story, but I can't tell it. I can't tell it. I just wanted you to see everything my brother owned, he carried with him, which meant every flight he took, wherever that plane went, his belongings, his personal belongings, were on that plane. They couldn't find him. Naturally, they weren't going to find one single piece of personal belonging for my brother. This is what we found. This is what we have to show that my brother was on that plane when he died. This is what I keep. My memories. And I've got the shoebox full of letters. Yeah. About once a year I read those letters. And you have to remember, I was 7 years old. But I remember so much about that. And I did get the chance to go to the Air Force Base. Now, as a result of this, and I do believe this resulted in our trip to South Dakota, because the newspaper picked up on us and there was an article in the newspaper. 2 or 3 days later, a man called the newspaper, talked to the reporter, and said, I was there that day. I saw that airplane crash. I remember it. She gave me the man's name. He was the young man that had just joined the Navy. And he read the article in the paper and said, I was that young man that hit the ground when those bullets started exploding. Now, there was something else I was going to say, and I don't remember what it was. That's what happened when, But these are my memories. This was my big brother, handsome young man, like I showed you before. Here he is. Very proud young soldier. And according to him, the 300 men that he was a companion to during that time were just like him. They were proud of what they were doing. In fact, he said that he got to eat his meals in the officers' quarters. He was a private, eating his meals with the commanding officers. I never realized how important he could have been if he had continued. But he was a patriot. He loved his country. He loved his family. And he was taken from us. So that was World War II. That's how it was. That's how it was. Oh, I know what I was going to tell you. 2 years after we were there, they built a museum and monuments because there were a lot of plane crashes in the Badlands while they were in training. They were building the planes so fast and preparing these young men to fly those planes that I think in 2 weeks, there were 3 plane crashes right there in the Badlands next to the airfield. So they built this museum, and I've got pictures somewhere of the monument. One of the things that we were there for was there are monuments for World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War. You saw those walls of names, but there was nothing for the unsung hero. These young men were among the unsung heroes. There was no monument for them. There was no memorial for them. So 2 years after we were there, Ellis Air Force Base now has the museum, and it has a monument with my brother's name on it. Now, I don't know what this story will mean to you, but World War II, any memory of that will soon be gone because all of the people are old now. And those that still remember will soon be gone, and there will be no one to tell the stories of the things that happened during World War II. I'm telling you about one soldier, my brother. Thank you for watching.